Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We are once again diving deep into the source material that you provided.
That's right.
Our whole goal here is to give you, the learner, the core insights, the surprising facts, and the strategic takeaways from some pretty complex information.
And our mission today, it isn't really just about reading the text. It's more about reading the intent behind it.
The intent.
We're taking a single, very focused source, and we're just going to dissect its structure, its framing. We want to pull out every little nugget of insight.
And not just from the content, but from the framework it promises.
Exactly.
So our central subject today, she's a figure who basically defines modern cultural influence, a global powerhouse whose career isn't just an arc, it's almost like a map of strategic conquest.
And we are looking at her trajectory through a very specific lens. The source you gave us is titled Excerpts from Winna Winnema Oyashit What You Said Esses.
Right, which translates, as you confirmed for us, to The Path to Success of Beyoncé Giselle Knowles. And this title, this is our entire battlefield today. Okay, so let's unpack this. The goal here is to understand what kind of path this source is charting for her.
And just as importantly, what it's implicitly defining as success for an artist of this magnitude.
The fascinating title.
Oh, it's a remarkable title.
Yeah.
It carries a massive conceptual weight. You can almost infer the source's entire argument just from the specific words they chose.
It's not a casual biography.
No, not at all. It signals a methodical analysis, a real deep dive.
So let's start with the subject identification itself, because that feels like the first big signal. The authors chose her most comprehensive, formal identity, Beyoncé Giselle Knowles.
Yeah.
So why do that? Why not just the mononym, Beyoncé, the global brand?
Well, that choice, it's an immediate declaration of scope. It tells you everything right up front.
How so?
When you're analyzing an artist whose entire public identity is built on one single powerful brand name, like, an Adele or a Prince, the choice to use the full name, Giselle Knowles, it immediately grounds the discussion in the individual. It suggests a focus on the architecture of the person, not just the performance.
That feels incredibly deliberate.
Yeah.
It's like the authors are saying we're moving beyond album sales and stage shows, and we're getting into the strategic decisions made by the individual behind the corporate entity.
Exactly. It's analyzing the CEO just as much as the diva.
Right.
The mononym, Beyoncé, that functions as the final product, the untouchable, creatively flawless performer. But Giselle Knowles, that brings in the origin story.
The rigorous training, the family management.
All of it. The conscious decisions made about vulnerability and privacy. The source is essentially telling us we believe the person is the path.
But hold on, couldn't using the full name just be a stylistic thing? An academic choice to add a bit of gravitas rather than some implicit promise of a psychological analysis?
That's a fair challenge, it is.
How do we distinguish between just formal language and actual analytical intention?
I think the key is how it's connected. If the title were, say, a study of the career of Beyoncé Giselle Knowles, then yeah, it might just be formality.
Okay.
But because it links the full name directly to the path to success, it creates a sense of causation. It implies that the full person, Giselle Knowles, was required to successfully navigate the high-stakes decisions that the brand, Beyoncé, presented.
I see.
So we can anticipate sections on, like, business maneuvers, securing ownership of her masters, which requires a deep dive into the business acumen of Giselle Knowles, the executive.
So if they were only analyzing the music, they could have just stuck with the mononym.
Probably, yeah.
But because they're analyzing the path, which involves strategic control, business independence, longevity, they need the full identity to support that whole structural argument.
The full name signals that the subject of success is a synthesis of the artist and the businesswoman.
And that synthesis is the key insight from this first frame.
It is. And for you, the learner, this raises a really important question. What stands out to you when you see her name presented in full?
Yeah. Does it change your mental catalog of her achievements? From purely musical to, including her influence as a director, a cultural curator, a negotiator, the full name invites that level of holistic evaluation.
It definitely puts the focus squarely on intentionality. It suggests success wasn't just some happy accident of a beautiful voice.
No.
It was a strategically executed plan involving the individual and the choices she made, often, behind the scenes.
It shifts the narrative from star power to strategic power. The source is promising to demystify the magic by framing it as a series of deliberate, sequential choices made by one focused individual.
Speaking of sequence, let's shift our gaze to how that second big conceptual component, the path to success, or ulisokret.
Mm-hmm.
And this is where it gets really compelling for me. The term path is it's loaded.
It absolutely is. A path implies something navigable, something sequential, and maybe even replicable.
Right. It's not the chaos of genius or the phenomenon. No. A path suggests that if we follow the steps that are laid out in the source, we should be able to understand the journey logically.
A path has distinct turns and phases. So if the authors are charting a path, they must be prioritizing chronology and strategy over just, celebrating her.
They're arguing that A led to B and that B was the necessary foundation for C.
It forces us to categorize her entire decades-long career.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture of career analysis, a title promising a path, it's often designed to be highly structured, almost like a case study.
Okay, so we can probably anticipate what those phases would be.
I think so. We can anticipate the source will probably divide her career into, let's say, 4 crucial phases, each one acting as a sequential step on this path.
Okay, let's lay those hypothetical phases out, because this is what the authors must have addressed to justify a title like that. Phase 1 has to be the foundation.
Destiny's Child.
Has to be.
Absolutely. The source would likely argue that Destiny's Child wasn't just a successful girl group, it was her operational training ground.
Right. It taught her how to negotiate in a male-dominated industry.
How to manage production, and critically, how to handle constant scrutiny, both internal and external. That step gave her the market awareness she needed for independence later.
Okay. So phase 2 then is the pivot to solo identity. Around 2003. This is the really risky step where the path could have just ended, or at least flattened out.
And the source would probably analyze this as a strategic risk management phase. It was the moment she proved she could carry the weight of an entire enterprise all by herself.
But the pivot alone wasn't enough.
No, it just proved the talent. The next critical step is what defines the true path to success.
Which brings us to phase 3, the acquisition of control. This probably centered around the mid-2000s, the formation of Parkwood Entertainment.
Yes.
This is where the path turns from artistic growth to, business mastery.
Precisely. The source likely argues that the ability to retain intellectual property, to own her master recordings, that was the critical strategic turn on the path.
It was the infrastructure that guaranteed her longevity.
It really was. I mean, if you own the road you walk on, no one can redirect your journey. The path here is less about singing and more about asset management.
That distinction is so key. And if those 3 phases establish the foundation, the identity, and the infrastructure, what's the final defining phase of the path?
Phase 4 would be innovation and reinvention, starting maybe with the surprise visual album drop in 2013 and continuing all the way through Lemonade. This phase demonstrates mastery over the very industry structure she helped build. And the source would frame this not just as creativity, but as a strategic weapon.
Using mystery and control to completely bypass traditional marketing cycles.
Exactly.
So a source that's dedicated to charting her path doesn't just list these accomplishments. It argues that the success of Phase 4 was entirely dependent on the structural control she achieved in Phase 3.
Which in turn relied on the lessons learned in Phases 1 and 2.
The path is sequential causation. It's a chain of events.
The big insight here is that the source is treating her career not as a series of events, but as a long-term strategic game plan. It removes the element of luck and replaces it with relentless, conscious decision-making.
Which brings us to the final core concept from the title. What does the source even define as success? When the authors chose uno, the path to success, are they talking about money, art, influence?
Well, given the rigor that's signaled by using Beyoncé Giselle Knowles and the structure implied by the path, the definition of success has to be blended. It has to be comprehensive.
It can't just be commercial success.
No, plenty of artists sell records but have zero control. And it can't just be critical success either. Many critically acclaimed artists lack longevity.
So I would bet the authors are aiming for something like total mastery. Success, in this context, is the ability to operate across all dimensions at the same time.
Creative innovation.
Complete financial independence and a lasting cultural relevance that spans generations.
That's a very sophisticated definition. And if the source is charting a path to that level of success, to mastery, it has to focus heavily on longevity. Right. Longevity is maybe the single hardest metric to achieve in that industry. Maintaining relevance and power for 3 decades, from the late 90s to today.
Yeah.
That's a feat achieved by very, very few.
Which means the source has to analyze the strategic choices that protected her career from the whims of the market.
Deliberate image management, strategic silence.
Creating demand through scarcity. The business strategy is the path to sustaining the creative success.
And this structural analysis, this is what makes a source like this so appealing to the learner. It takes a dazzling, almost overwhelming career, and it organizes it into a set of principles that can actually be studied.
It implies that this monumental success is the product of definable, sequential, and maybe even replicable actions.
It transforms her genius into a strategic blueprint.
Okay, let's pull all these threads together. So what does this all mean for us? The provided source, even though it's just a title, it acts as this incredibly powerful analytical lens. It tells us what to look for in her career, the specific steps and strategies that defined her success as both a fully accountable person, Giselle Knowles, and a globally dominant brand, Beyoncé.
The title creates an expectation of rigor and depth. It demands that the analysis treats the subject not just as a cultural phenomenon, but as a CEO, an architect, and a strategic mastermind who actively carved out every single meter of the path she walks.
It's a great reminder, I think, that the most valuable part of any research can often be just how the question is framed.
Yes.
By framing it as a path belonging to the full person, the authors compel us to look for causation, for strategy, and for comprehensive success, not just talent.
And this exercise, it just shows the power of intentional language. Every single word chosen in The Path to Success of Beyoncé Giselle Knowles frames how the reader should approach the sheer vastness of her career. It gives us a roadmap before we even turn the page.
This has been a really structured deep dive into implication and intentionality. We appreciate you walking us through the hidden analytical promises embedded in that source title.
My pleasure. The key takeaway is to always look past the subject matter itself and analyze the analytical structure that's being imposed by the author. That structure sometimes tells you more about the insight than the facts themselves.
And as we leave you to mull over this conceptual framing, we have one final provocative thought to build on the source material. Since the source promises to chart her path to success, consider this for yourself. What single non-musical milestone, an act of business, philanthropy, or a personal choice that reinforced her independence, do you believe was the most crucial, yet often overlooked, step on the path of Beyoncé Giselle Knowles?
Yeah.
Think about the strategic silent moves that define the architecture of her success today.